Hey, are you looking to upgrade your key life areas and evolve to a higher level of existence? To practically harness personal growth and spirituality in a crazy, busy, imperfect world? Then you've come to the right place. My name is Prash, and this is Urban Spirituality, the show which uniquely fuses ancient wisdom with contemporary self-growth and spiritual disciplines to deliver value-adding tools, traits, and insights to help you unleash your fullest potential. We always keep it real, featuring authentic, unfiltered dialogue with guests from diverse backgrounds to inspire, entertain, and enlighten all who listen. So get ready for your dose of urban spirituality. Be present and let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Urban Spirituality with your host Prash K, and with me today, somebody I've been trying to track down for some time, but she's been a hard person to get hold of. Somebody who I think you will really enjoy because she presents a view on an important topic that I think a lot of us grapple with. And I think this is going to be a really good interview for you to get your teeth into and learn something really valuable. Allow me to introduce our special guest today. Tatiana Kassessinoff was trained as a biomedical researcher and spent loads of years as a strategic consultant in biotechnology and scientific institutions. She's had a huge formal career in the world of science while maintaining, however, a passion for holistic and mind-body connection work. In fact, in 2017, her passion led her to retrain as a clinical hypnotherapist and a transformational therapist. As of last year, she launched a wonderful podcast called London Heal, dedicated to empowering people to take back control of their healthcare through knowledge and educated choice in all aspects of body, mind, and spirit. There's so much more to say, but I'm going to let her say it herself. Please welcome the wonderful Tatiana Kassessinoff. Tatiana.
Prash, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Sorry it was so difficult, but life is
really glad to have you. Now, Tatiana, you're back in London, and your feet are firmly planted on terra firma for a little while at least. Tell us what's been happening in your world recently, and then let's take a walk down memory lane and share a little bit.
Well, my main focus of attention these days is the podcast, which I am really, really enjoying because I get to learn so much. And instead of me spending hours and hours sitting in front of my computer, I get to talk to the most interesting people who tell me all that they know and share that with the world, which I hope is really useful. And I find it so amazing. I love technology, the fact that I can be sitting here in London and there's somebody over the other side of the earth who has an internet connection and they're listening and learning. I mean, what could be better than that?
I think that's one of the advantages that technology provides us. And when used in moderation, what a beneficial thing. I want to rewind the clock a little bit. The Tatiana that's sitting with us here has had such a varied history. I know that you've spent time in many countries. Give us a little bit about your background and your training, and perhaps a highlight or two along the way, please.
Sure. Well, I'll quote my mother. My mother always used to say that I was a salad because I have very mixed origins. So
okay.
My mother is of Greek extraction. My father was of Russian extraction. I was born and brought up in the UK. And so I've never really felt at home anywhere, but I also feel at home everywhere, which is great. And that led me off to go and explore the world. So after training here I did my first degree in chemistry and my second degree also in chemistry, but with a much more kind of medical orientation. And then I did BTA, which is what all scientists were doing back in the 90s, and some of them still are, which was been to America, because that was the CV. And at the time, that was absolutely, and probably still is, the place where great, absolute cutting edge work is done. So I was very lucky to get a postdoc at the National Institutes of Health in the US.
Washington, right?
In Washington, DC. Yeah. It's actually technically in Maryland, but... So I was there for 5 years, and that's where I met my husband. My husband is German. So the next stop was to move to Germany. And I arrived in the country not speaking a word of German and not knowing anybody. So that was my first task, was to try and somehow get to grips with this impossible language. I think there's a great quote, actually, I forget now who it was by, that said that, German's a useful and easy language to learn, but it takes a lifetime to do it. And I can only confirm that. So I was living in Germany for the last 20 odd years, and made the move back to the UK about 3 years ago.
Right. Okay. And then since then you've been back in the UK.
Exactly.
Tell us if there are, in your times, in all these years, if any powerful epiphanies or any breakthroughs that you had. I mean, I know you mentioned that you were in a very mechanistic, traditional academic career and background, but at some stage that kind of switched, and then you kind of got into alternative healing modalities and so forth. Are there any particular, standout highlights or epiphany moments that you could share with us?
A series of them, I would say, actually, maybe nothing singularly profound, but I've always actually had an interest in natural health. And in fact, before I even went to study chemistry as an undergraduate, I had actually wanted to be a chiropractor because my mother had very, very, very serious back problems for many years and had been told that she would have to have an operation and end up in a full body cast. She went to visit a chiropractor, and after 2 or 3 sessions was perfectly fine. And I thought this was magic. So I really wanted to do that. Back in the 90s, that was not an easy thing to do because there was no funding, and I simply couldn't afford to pay for private education. Just wasn't an option. So I decided to go down the more classical route and pursue my interest in science. And I thought, well, the chemistry of life, you would think I would go for biology, but actually I decided to go for chemistry. And I think the next probably major impact that had on me was when I was doing my PhD. A lot of the work that I was doing was on animal studies. And one day I just woke up and I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't kill things. I'm supposed to be studying the biology and the chemistry of life, and I'm doing it on dead things. Right. And that was just so intensely profound that I actually ended up finishing my PhD with help from my lab mates because I couldn't do this myself. I mean, it turned into a total phobia. I mean, I'm really not joking. And then when I went to the US to interview for a postdoc there, that was the very first thing I said was, I'm not working on live animals. And that was great because I got to actually work on cell cultures, which was fine. Another kind of epiphany I've had, I guess, was also realizing at some point that I had gone quite down the road of a scientific career, but I always felt like something was missing. I felt like this wasn't the whole story. This wasn't the whole picture. And I wanted to go back and discover that for myself. So that was why I decided to turn my back on my science career and pursue what I was really interested in. In fact, it was something that I had actually always tried to direct my research towards. I was only a researcher for about 3 or 4 years. I wasn't a particularly good researcher because my mind is not really set up for that very kind of focus.
We'll come to that in a minute.
I just jump from ideas, and I find so much interesting, and I was always changing things. And I was trying to establish a neuronal connection between the nervous system and the immune system in terms of things like allergic disease. And so 20 years later, I kind of revisited this topic, and I just thought, if you really want to find out about how important the nervous system is and the mind is, because that's where it starts with the brain, go and find out. So that was my trigger to go and retrain. Yeah.
To retrain. And so obviously fast forward, you retrained. Let me ask you this. You retrained, obviously you're practicing in a different way to what you were before. What would you say is your mission? What gets you up in the morning? What drives you in these days?
I think really, we spoke a little bit offline about this. I view my role as a guide, perhaps is the best word. I have an absolute fascination for finding things out. I love to learn, and I love to learn about this subject because it's one I'm totally passionate about, which is, how does the mind, the body, and the spirit all work together? Because it clearly does. There's the mind never told the body they weren't connected, and the spirit, right. Same thing. It's the way modern science has gone, but I think even science these days is having to get to grips with not only the mind but consciousness as well.
Completely. Bruce Lipton, biology, I believe, all of those.
Absolutely. And also even very, very, a lot of people would criticize those kind of scientists and label them pseudoscience, which I think is very insulting. But, the whole study of things like epigenetics and so on and so forth.
Completely.
I was just reading a scientific paper this morning that pretty categorically proves that things like IBS are best therapied with hypnotherapy. So,
phenomenal.
The gut-brain connection and so on and so forth. So, we are really complex creatures. And that's really what fascinates me, is to discover how that all works. And I like to find these things out. And then, as I said before, the best way of finding things out is to ask the people who know. And I like to give that information on to other people. So, I pride myself in being able to kind of look at the big picture.
So that's your passion. That's what drives you. And I know that there are a number of areas that you really have some good exposure and experience in, both with your private clients and through the work that you do. So let's talk about the hot topic of today's interview. Let's talk about resilience. Let's start by perhaps with two questions. Firstly, can we define what you consider or regard resilience to be for people? And secondly, why should these viewers, anybody who's tuning in, why should they give a damn about resilience? What does it even mean for them?
It's a complicated topic because we are complicated people. In fact, one of my guests just a couple of weeks ago was Professor David Peters, and he actually heads up the Centre for Resilience at the University of Westminster here in London. And he defines resilience as the ability to not only bounce back, but to bounce forward. And I love that definition, because I think that's exactly the point, is that, we are not static bits of metal that when you bend them backwards and forwards, after a while they snap. They become harder with each bend and then they snap. Well, we don't do that. We, as human beings, have the unique capacity to adapt and learn, and actually the next time we're confronted with the same issue, we should be able to not only deal with it, but actually even land one step in front of where we landed before. Nice. So it's, in my sort of definition, it's the ability to deal with adversity and come back better than you were before.
That makes a lot of sense. I use this, sorry, I'm going to interrupt. I love the way you described it, because on one of the retreats we ran, I kind of described resilience as human plasticity.
Absolutely. It is.
We talk about neural plasticity and stuff, but this is human plasticity, acknowledging that humans are adaptable and able to get stronger. Wolff's Law, and all these other scientific terms about coming back stronger. It's not just about being mended and kind of bouncing back. It is, as you say, as your guest says, bouncing forward.
Exactly. And that works on many levels. The key is emotional resilience, because without that you have nothing. But it's also physical resilience. The two things go hand in hand, because you can't separate these things out. So,
why should we care? Okay, you can't separate these things out. But fun, break it down for us. Bigger picture view. What does it mean to us if our resilience isn't high? What's the impact? Why should we invest effort into this?
Right. If you don't have resilience, you give up. It's that simple. If you're confronted with a situation which you find crushing and overwhelming, in the same way as an animal experiences this kind of fold experience, the same thing happens to human beings that are not resilient. They become overwhelmed, they become destroyed, and they fold. From one end of the scale, you can see that as, oh, this didn't work, so I'm a failure, so I'm no good at this, so I'm never going to try it again, all the way to really
Right.
serious disease, where people can literally collapse and not be able to get up
To
and
get
deal
up.
with the world, as a result of trauma and so on and so forth.
Right. People
So
sinking into depression, a lot of,
exactly.
there must be other psychological disorders, NPDs, other conditions that come about due to a lack of mental fortitude or resilience, I guess. That kind of really makes a lot of sense. People who may be slipping into depression, there must be a scale, right? That, some people get mildly depressed and just kind of bounce back out. Others actually, the same incident takes them into a deeper state of depression, and therefore the resilience is broken more easily. I mean, it's just powerful stuff.
Yeah, it is really powerful stuff because I think it's essential to survive modern life. We live in a way that we have never ever had to live before. I mean, Homo sapiens sapiens has been around in this form for about 200,000 years.
Right.
So if we were to meet the first, Homo sapien, you wouldn't actually be that different to them. And yet, there's a huge difference between wandering the savannah and trying to live in the middle of central London. I mean,
Right.
we have exposure to a bombardment of assaults in all senses of the word,
Right.
from chemical to physical to emotional to all sorts of assaults that we have to not only deal with, but we have to actually try and survive and thrive. And that's really hard work. And we don't all manage to do that, unfortunately. And
That's so
resilience
massive. Yeah.
is something that is absolutely central to that ability, that you just don't let life crush you, but you actually can flower.
I love that. What gets me excited here is the description that you gave. I mean, talk about somebody living, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years ago. Our ancestors may have had to had it almost in one sense better off, in as much as they had a very small, finite, and clearly defined set of predators or threats that they had to deal with. So yes, the threats may have been bigger, right? Saber-toothed tiger, or some predator out there trying to attack them, some animal, or other tribes trying to attack them, whatever. But they were clearly defined and finite. You could count the number of threats maybe on one hand.
Exactly.
And they were very and they were very overt. You knew what they were. Here in the modern day, we've got all kinds of threats. They're not just human threats. We've got information threats, digital threats coming through media, and a lot of them are very, very incognito. They're happening right now. We don't even realize that we're actually being adversely influenced by media, by technology, by people, by society, by conditioning. And therefore, we're getting all kinds of threats and assaults upon us. So it's almost like the number of predators has exponentially grown, and many of them we don't even recognize, and yet they're on our ass. Did I say that? They're on our case all day, Tatiana. What the hell are we supposed to do, Tatiana?
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the point is as well that's actually more important is that these things are constant. There's no respite.
There's no respite. You don't go into your cave and hang out till the next day when you go hunting for your food or whatever.
Exactly.
It's
and
happening all the damn time.
Exactly the term that David Peters uses is, we've got to find cave time, and that's exactly the point. I mean, if you think about something like a gazelle that's out in the grazing, and the lion, the predator, comes, and attacks one of the herd and brings it down, the rest of the gazelles go, "Whew, threat over. I got 3 days grace while he digests that. I think I'll just go back to wherever the threat's over." And this whole kind of stress system, we hear a lot these days about adrenal fatigue and so on and so forth. And, getting out of this fight and flight. And most of us never get out of fight and flight. We are in it 24 hours a day. How many people do you know wake up and said, "Oh, I had this dream." We were even doing it in our sleep.
We're doing it in our sleep. Our sleep's ruined.
Exactly.
People's sleep is just ruined because they're not actually getting quality sleep. They can't get into REM. They can't get into deep sleep. Dreams are disturbing them. All kinds of things are happening. So even in our sleep, I mean, how true is that, Tatiana? Tatiana, it happens for so many of us. I think most of us can
Exactly.
relate to that, folks.
Exactly. So this constant bombardment of stress is essentially the problem, but the stress is not going to go away. So what choice do you have? You have one choice. How do you deal with it?
How do you deal with resilience? How do you deal with the stress, and therefore the question is, it's not a question of, do I need resilience in my life? The question is, how do I strengthen my resilience?
Exactly.
And how do I live in such a way that the stresses that I face are mitigated to a degree, neutralized, or better handled? Kind of one of these three responses. What would you say?
Absolutely. I think all of those is probably true. And there's a lot of evidence to show that people have different degrees of resilience. And of course, that all starts way early on. So,
Right.
Little baby is born onto this planet and they are resilient. They are ready to take on life. And we make sure that doesn't happen awfully quickly with often the best of intentions. But, that's where it starts. If a child is exposed to just normal parents who are probably trying to do the best they can and coming from the right place, a child will learn very, very quickly, I have to bend and shape myself to please these people because I am 100% dependent on them for my existence. Human babies especially don't even get up and walk straight away like most animals do. They lie down for a couple of years until they can walk. They can't move. They can't feed themselves. They are 100% dependent on everything around them. And also the other thing, of course, is that children, the very small babies, are absolutely not capable of logical thought. That doesn't develop until much later on. They're pure emotion. They are just pure feeling machines. That's all they do. They pick up sensory information like a sponge. The other factor to consider is it's actually an adaptive process of evolution, and it's a great thing taken in context, is that we absorb information without a filter at that age. Absolutely everything that we experience goes straight in. Because if you think about a child being born, as I said, in the center of London or in another place or out in the country, their environment is completely different. We are, human beings are ubiquitous. We're all over this planet. We live in every single corner of this world, and every environment is different. So nature says, well, okay, I'm going to give you a set of ground instincts, if you like, to know how to survive, but the rest you have to learn because it has to be relevant to your environment. And so we come in and we learn, we just absorb everything. The problem is that affects your resilience. That hugely affects your resilience, because depending on the kind of environment that you have, depending on the kind of feedback that you get from your parents, your caregivers, your school, all of these things, this affects the way that we see ourselves and the way that we become resilient or not, as the case may be. So that's kind of like the root of all of this. And that's oftentimes where a lot of people have to start. Because if you don't always need to go back and dig up the past. I'm not actually a great lover of that, because I think one should look forwards. But sometimes there are real stumbling blocks which a person cannot get over until they go back and dig it up. And then you have to reframe everything that you learned as a child and make it work for you as an adult. Because what we just don't appreciate is that these things that we learn very, very early on are like a blueprint. They are our blueprint for the way we spend the rest of our lives.
It governs our self-concept. It defines our beliefs. It affects our values, the choices that we make, our behavior, therefore, and all the ramifications based on our self-concept, on our belief and values, are driven by those experiences from the past. So until we go back, and it's almost like rewriting the code. Right. When you reframe, rewriting, you're not going back in the past. I kind of say this sometimes, there's nothing wrong with looking at your past, but just don't live there.
Exactly.
So to go back into the past, to do a little bit of forensic work, to ascertain where certain traumatic or hard experiences occurred that may have shaped your resilience levels today would be maybe a good starting point to see how you can then go back and, as you say, reframe and rewrite the meaning of those incidences to help almost strengthen your resilience. Is that part of this process?
That is most definitely part of the process. I think also what is really central to that is the fact that a lot of people don't realize that that's even possible. We think that we are our thoughts. We think that we are our emotions. And the very fact that actually you can control those and determine them and limit them is actually really something which is kind of quite a bit of a light bulb experience for a lot of people.
It's an epiphany. I mean, I think it's curative. I'd go as far as saying it's curative in and of itself, just to realize that you are not your thoughts, that, we are greater. We transcend that which, people should realize when they say my mind. Nobody says I mind. They say my mind, my thoughts. In other words, we are the possessor of I'm getting philosophical. Sorry, Tatiana. We're the possessor of our thoughts. It's our mind. It's our thoughts. And if the moment we recognize it, that the mind and the thoughts, therefore, are not us, and that we are the owner of those, we then start to take ownership and responsibility. I know you're going to get into the whole responsibility thing in a minute. I mean, that isn't that kind of the first step there, as you say, then?
It is. It's understanding that, and responsibility is a big issue, and one has to be really, really careful here, because I think a big trap of responsibility is avoiding blame. Because just because you're responsible for yourself, it doesn't mean if you make a mistake and if things go wrong, you're to blame. Yes and no. I have to be really, really, I really have to emphasize this point, because I see this oftentimes with clients, that they maybe have taken that step to accepting responsibility for their own thoughts and feelings, but then they beat up on themselves so hard because of that it ends up being counterproductive. And that is not resilience. That's quite the opposite of resilience.
Kind of wears yourself down, right? It could wear your confidence down.
Exactly. It's like Jung, talked about many moons ago about the shadows. We have to kind of embrace our shadows. Humans don't come onto this world being perfect. That would be thoroughly boring and a waste of time. That's not what evolution is interested in. Evolution is interested in moving forwards, in growing and expanding and experiencing, and that involves good and bad, plus and minus. Everything's always a homeostatic control, and that means that everything's always dynamic. So don't go beating up on yourself, because it's counterproductive. And one of the things that my mentor and teacher for hypnotherapy and RTT, rapid transformational therapy, Marissa Peer, always stipulates that that's a very important factor that you have to remember, that you are I actually term it a chain of pain. It's
I like that.
You can't blame yourself and you can't blame your parents, but that doesn't mean that you have to dissect out the emotion that's carried with all of these things from the facts. If you were abused as a child, you were abused as a child, and that's it. Deal with it. Beat your parents up, and don't
push. Or yourself.
Exactly. And the words and the pictures that you say to yourself are the most powerful of all. So that's Marissa's message, and it's really valuable because it's very true.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that what you've just said there, Tatiana. I guess I'm reminded of an old Mike and the Mechanics song. For those of you who are listening and are old enough to remember Mike and the Mechanics, what a band. They had a song called A House of Many Rooms, and the whole song was where Paul Carrack sings about, he goes, I am a house of many rooms. I have my failures, I have the mistakes, I've had the wrongdoings I've done to people, and then I've had my joys, the people that I've helped, the triumphs that I've had. He says, I'm a house of many rooms. And therefore, as Jung puts it, the shadow self, I think the lesson here is to recognize that we're not here. The lesson is to not eliminate the shadow self. It's to recognize and acknowledge the shadow self and allow us to and kind of learn to integrate that shadow self as part of us. Acknowledgement is the first part, not killing, not cessation of that shadow self, would you say? Acknowledge, accept part of that shadow self, and then, as you say, accept responsibility without beating yourself up. I think that's another powerful message here to take away, because if you're beating yourself up, let's get this clear, we're weakening our resilience, the very thing we want to strengthen.
Completely. Yeah.
So,
and as I said, your mind actually responds to the words you say to yourself and the pictures you build in your head much more than it does to actually what comes from the outside world, because other people, you don't. So if you look in the mirror in the morning and go, God, you look terrible. You believe that without filter. You're putting it straight in. So
right, because the subconscious has no filter, right? The conscious mind speaks. It's just the programmer. The subconscious is the hard disk. Program, you're rubbish. And the subconscious is taking it in, no filter, just records it. And what's that doing? That's not doing any good. So are we saying another profound lesson? Then we talked about the shadow self, acknowledging it. Are we saying another profound lesson is become more choosy about the language we use upon ourselves to interpret the incidents from the past and the incidents that are happening in our life right now? Both? Is that part of this?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely essential. And when I say things like don't beat up on yourself, you cannot and should not try to ignore negative emotions. I hate that's really out there at the moment, that we're all supposed to be happy all of the time. Well, not possible.
Yeah.
Just not possible. The question is exactly what we talked about with the past.
Positive psychology took us on a garden path. Positive psychology in the Western world has taken on a garden path that tells us that all we're going to see is beautiful roses, smell great fragrances, and see great scenery. Well, guess what? It forgot about the fact that there's thorns along the way. There's weeds along the way. And that's the Eastern tradition, and for me, being brought up in that, the Eastern tradition is all about that you embrace those other sides of you, work through the emotions, sit through it.
Exactly. Feel them, because if you don't, then, and you suppress them, then they're going to come out somewhere else. And if you ignore them for long enough, they're going to come out big and strong. And before you know it, you're ill.
And your resilience is weakened.
And your resilience is, at that point, not only your mental resilience, but your physical.
Right, breakdown of the immune system, and as you said earlier, let's remind our audience here, folks, that there's a powerful connection between our immune system as well as our other systems, the sympathetic, parasympathetic, endocrine system. Mm-hmm. All of these are connected with our brain biology and our mind, and therefore what we're putting in our head and our brain, I think, as you were saying off before this interview, has a profound effect on our body and our health, and therefore we could weaken our resilience if we're not careful.
Exactly.
So we have the power, is what you're saying. We have the power. We don't need to give this away to doctors and other, and people out there, our parents, or blame others. It's within our hands to strengthen our own resilience.
Modern society does not encourage that. Quite the contrary. We live in a society which is totally focused on disempowering everybody. We think that our healthcare belongs in the hands of our doctors. I mean, how many people have got even the vaguest idea of what's going on in their body? And I'm not talking about understanding this from a medical perspective. We're just not tuned in anymore. People don't recognize symptoms, that they feel something, they'll ignore it, or they can't interpret it correctly, because everything belongs in the hands of a doctor. We think that our education belongs solely in the hands of our educators. We believe that our careers and our progression in life belongs in the hands of our bosses.
Wow,
Take your power back. Take your power back.
Yeah, you're weakening your resilience just by doing that, right? We're giving away our power. Our resilience is weakening because we're giving it away to everybody. Exactly. Which is, and let me touch on that. I wanted to ask this very point here. We're living in a world where a lot of people therefore feel self-entitled. There's a whole, self-entitlement movement going on. Everybody thinks that, the world owes it to them to give it to them on a goddamn plate. I'm speaking a little casually here, but a lot of people out there
the
do feel like,
millennial
hey,
problem.
yeah, the millennial problem. And then you've got the cotton wool culture. Let's talk about that for a second. What's your views on the cotton wool culture? I call it the cotton wool culture. It's this whole goddamn civilization of people who are fragile and being blanketed. And what's going on there, man?
Given the prize for taking part, yeah. It's sort of like an overreaction, I think, perhaps.
That's a curse, right? It's got to be a curse.
It is, because it's not the real
going
world.
On?
It's not the real world. I mean, we're talking about resilience. Resilience is, perhaps it's the greatest of Buddhist teachings, isn't it? It's accepting what is. You don't have to be happy with what is, and you may want to go out and change it, but for that moment you have to accept what is without judgment.
So true.
And,
so true.
If you cotton wool people, you are never ever going to allow that person to develop resilience to deal with adversity, because you prevent them from being exposed to it. And if they are exposed to it, you put the blame and the responsibility way outside. It's their fault. It's this, it's society, it's whatever. Don't go there, because it's not actually doing you any good.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like you and I remember, right? I mean, I know I do, and I'm sure you probably do. Like when we were kids, right? We didn't have any electronic gadgets back in those days. Okay, maybe the odd little, Sinclair Spectrum or something called Commodore 64. Hey, most of our time was spent outside. We fell down, we scratched ourselves, we were bleeding on our knees. We broke a little thing here or there. Our parents weren't mollycoddling us. They're like, come on, they didn't treat us with this mollycoddling thing. We were allowed to get, nowadays, they want to let their kids out on the street. People are like, oh, don't go out. Something might happen. You'll get injured. Kids are monitored like, 24/7 in their own house. You're not allowed to just run around. We were playing by the train tracks. We were running around all over the place. We ran out. We've been all right. We haven't gone crazy. What about the fact that, your pet died, your grandfather died, and nowadays everybody's like, they don't want to even acknowledge those things for the kid. They just give them a PlayStation or give them a game and say, here, distract yourself. Something sad happens. Here, play with technology. Play with my iPhone here, instead of actually sitting down and talking to them about the hard things.
Absolutely. And
what the hell? What's happened?
That is because we've become so disconnected from our inner worlds. Where everybody's living out here. We're trying to fix and change everything out here. And out here is not
where it's at.
It's not where the party's happening. It's
so
in
true.
Here. And if you shift back, I mean, obviously, you don't want to spend all of your life in here either, because there is a world out there, and we're supposed to take part in it and experience it. And that's the joy of being alive. But, you have to find a balance between those, and you can't blame and fix and protect everything. It's not going to help you. You have to learn how to deal with life, and not only deal with it, but actually sometimes, in fact, oftentimes, I can't tell you how many times I've come across people that have had the most awful things happen to them, that when they've worked through them and have been resilient and have come out the other end, they will turn around and say, you know what, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. That's resilience. That's taking something which is adversity, which is going through it, feeling the pain, experiencing it, and then knowing that you come out at the end stronger than you were when you went in at the beginning. And that would never have happened if you hadn't have had that experience. Now, of course, nobody likes bad things to happen.
No.
And, luckily for most of us, really bad things don't often happen. But, not that you'd believe that if you watch the news. That's another one of my huge, huge tips, by the way, which is don't watch the news.
Love that. I'm going to get two more
turn it off. Turn it off.
Tip number one, don't watch the news, because it's just...
Don't do it. I mean, every single one of us wants to go out there and be a well-informed person and feel like we, got our finger on the pulse of what's going on. But think about it. Newspapers, TV programs, whatever, they're only going to sell if they've got bad news. Right. And we have a society which is now running scared. They are running. Everybody is terrified of everything. This is not a good place to be. And you don't need to be terrified of everything. And the more terrified you are, the more these things are going to happen, because how much of our decision making and policy making is based in fear. You know,
Totally.
it's resilience is not being fearful. It's quite the opposite. It's saying, holy crap, that was not a good thing that I just had to deal with, or I may have to deal with, but I'll
Right.
get through it. You know, I'm going to get a strategy together. I'm going to find a way of how to deal with it, because
Yeah.
this is life, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, every now and again, something really dramatic and dreadful is going to happen. And God
Right.
forbid it's any one of us. But, you know, that's something that we just can't take account for. But most of the stuff that we view as cataclysmic is really not. You know, it just isn't going to kill you.
So true.
When you're sitting in your car driving down the highway and somebody cuts you up, they're not putting a gun to your head. They really aren't, you know. But we react that way
It's all overreacted.
because we're all running scared,
We're
you
running
know.
scared, and it's weakening
This
our
is
resilience.
it's not a good place to be.
Okay, so cut down on
Okay.
our news source. Give us two more. Give us two more
You want
as
two
we bring
more?
this to a
Okay,
close.
I could give you three more, which I
Three
think
more.
are
Fantastic. Go on. One
really,
more. A
really
bonus
important.
one.
First of all, I think as a meditation and mindfulness expert, you'll appreciate this, is just learn to monitor what you're thinking and feeling. And you'll
Right.
begin to realize
So true.
very, very quickly that when you think something or when you feel something, there's something or someone observing that, that's actually noticing that. Who's doing the noticing? That's you.
That's
So you're not your thoughts and you're not your feelings. Your feelings are real. You know, if you experience something and you get a rush of emotion, be it fear or love or joy or anger, those emotions are real. But you can decide
separate.
how long those take place, and you can separate yourself from them. You can feel them, you can let the emotion go through you, and then you can say, okay, done, I put that to bed. You understand where it comes from. You've been able to move yourself away. Another way of doing that is, for example, in an argument. You know, if you get into an argument with somebody, just step back mentally for a second and breathe. Just take a deep breath and listen to what you're saying, and listen to what the other person's saying, and ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? Why are they triggering me this way? And don't let yourself indulge in that cascade of you know, because it just builds and builds and builds and builds.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to be. So, you know, listen to what you're thinking, and listen to and look at your emotions. Don't judge them. Just observe them and notice where they come from. And the more practiced you get at that, the better you'll become at anticipating them and being able to regulate them. Because, you know, another part of resilience is self-regulation. That's really what it's about. It's learning to self-regulate. Another tip that I find incredibly useful is what I call random acts of kindness. You know, sometimes when we are going through the worst times in our life, we become really self-centered. You know, we focus in on our own feelings and our own thoughts so much that we can't kind of break out of that pattern. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to actually go and do something nice for someone else. Now, that sounds all very Pollyanna, and it isn't meant to be, because it actually, again, what it does is it gives you a set of feelings and emotions which are nothing other than pure and positive, because there is nothing so rewarding as doing something good for someone else. You know, that just will fire off all of your pleasure centers at once, you know, from oxytocin to endorphins, the whole gamut. And it puts you back and it resets you, so that you can then go back and clear with your, you know, your own crap with a much better, you know, view on the world, and more resilience and more energy. There was one more, but I don't remember what it was. It'll come back to me.
As we bring ourselves to a close, I have a couple of quick fire questions. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
Okay. First one, I love asking this. If you were a superhero and you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, heavens. What would it be and why? I have no idea. I actually think we're all superheroes, to be honest.
Okay.
This is really not part of that kind of mollycoddling or softy speak. I actually think that each and every one of us has enormous capacities which are totally untapped. So perhaps if I was a superhero, that would be what it was. It would be to show other people how they can be superheroes, because I actually think we all are.
I like that. Be a candle and show others how they can light their own candle. I love it. What advice, if you had a time machine and could go back in time, Michael J. Fox style, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Lighten up.
I like it. Take it easy.
Take it easy. I was a very, very intense young woman. I think I'm still a pretty intense adult, actually, but I really did used to beat up on myself a lot. That comes from my baggage, my upbringing.
Right. You said,
I had
parental conditioning,
exactly.
conditioning.
I was taught self-responsibility, sort of like, not 101, but sort of PhD grade as a very young child, and I think it was probably a little bit too much for me to handle. And so I blame myself for everything, and took on the responsibility of myself and everybody else's. So I would just say, lighten up.
That's another episode I want to do at some stage as well, dealing with achievement addiction. So many of us live that, feel that, suffer from it because we picked it up from somebody who wasn't even ourselves.
Right.
Borrowed it. Lastly, what's on your radar for 2019? You've talked about podcasts. Fill us in a little bit. What's on Tatiana?
Yeah, it's building and growing the podcast, and getting more information out there, and also getting that information into other formats. So there's a lot of ideas, none of which are really kind of completely ready to talk about, but there'll probably be a couple of courses coming out over the next time. Also making much more of an interactive community. That's really important to me. I think we need to sit and talk about these subjects and exchange ideas, because there's one thing I've learned throughout my own life, and also doing all the shows with all the different guests, is there's no one size fits all for anybody in anything. And I think part of a way of being able to find what's right for you is actually talking about it and flipping ideas backwards and forwards and getting feedback. So expanding the community, that's all on the radar.
Good. I like that. Thank heavens for podcasts. Folks, did you know
brilliant.
that the next to the US, the UK is the largest market for podcasts in the world after the US? 15%. A whopping 15% of the United Kingdom population listen to podcasts at least once a week. Can you believe that? And we're in a new media industry, and it's growing. Others have reached their saturation point, but this area is growing. So take advantage. Tatiana, where can we follow you? Where can we learn more about your podcast?
Well, the best place is actually tune in and listen over on iTunes. Podcast is, as you said very kindly, London Heal. It's a call to action, by the way.
If there ever was one, London Heal. We need that.
So we're up on iTunes, Stitcher, all of the other podcast platforms. You can find us anywhere over there. Follow us on Facebook, also over at London Heal, Twitter and Instagram, same handle. And if you want to become a London Heal insider, then go over to londonheal.com, because what I do offer, we have a lot of episodes which have a lot of facts and information, which is a bit difficult to hold in your head. And to save you the time, it's not a good business model for me, by the way, but to save you the time of re-listening to the episode or having to watch it or listen to it with a pencil and paper, we provide extended show notes for people who subscribe.
No small gift. No small gift.
Yeah, it's a big gift, and it's a lot of work for me. But I think it's if this stuff is going to be useful and meaningful, then it's required. So,
well, for the ex-researcher, and biotechnology specialist who has now become a podcaster, to make it her mission to heal London and beyond. I think you're doing a great job.
I want London to heal itself, actually. It's not my job, I'll just
take responsibility and develop its resilience.
Exactly.
Love it.
Take back your power.
Love it. So folks, thank you for tuning in. Tatiana, once again, I want to thank you. Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Spasiba. Did I get both right?
You get them all right. Yeah, absolutely spot
awesome.
on. The only one I have is namaste. So.
Namaste. And that's how we're going to round off the episode, folks. That's Tatiana. It's myself, Prash K. Please, if you like what we're doing, follow Tatiana, check in her podcast. Obviously, check out our podcast, Urban Spirituality, the show, 5-star rated, just like Tatiana's, right there on iTunes, Stitcher, podcast, Windows platform and Android platform. So go listen, learn, take this stuff with you, share, and let us heal London and beyond together. Folks, thank you so much. Prash K, Tatiana, namaste. Hey folks, thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and as with all our episodes, found something to inform, inspire, and empower you in your personal and spiritual journeys in life. As always, feel free to leave a little love through your ratings and comments, subscribe, and share it with those you care about. And take your personal and spiritual evolution to the next level by joining us on one of our unique events, workshops, or retreats, or taking advantage of our personal and professional coaching packages. Find out more about us at mantratherapy.co.uk. I'm your host, Prash K. This is Urban Spirituality, and we will catch you on the next episode.